Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Polarizer Podcast. I've been quite excited about this one because I get to talk to someone whose website I've been reading for over 20 years at this point. It was one of the first websites I really read. It was a website from the beginning of the internet. I'll tell you a little bit about it after I tell you about our wonderful sponsors. This show is brought to you by Alert. ALLERT for food allergies. It's a iPhone app for people who have food allergies and who are traveling in countries where they don't speak the language. Well, you're probably not doing a whole lot of traveling right now because of the whole COVID thing, but that will pass. And when it passes, I bet you want nothing more than to travel. If you have a food allergy, this app will help you. What it does, it will create a flashcard for the 14 most common allergies that are out there, which covers 95% of all allergies, and it does this in 44 different languages, which means it's pretty much the entire world. I personally tested this app as I'm allergic to dairy and peanuts all over Asia. Peanuts is a pretty big thing there, and I've been to some pretty remote places there, and every time I showed the output of that app, people got it right away, and I didn't have a single problem. So it really works. You don't need a data connection to use it. So if you install it on your phone, take it with you, and it just works everywhere, forever. Alert, ALLERT on the iOS App Store. This podcast is also brought to you by Onnit. And one of their flagship products is ℹABOUT. You know those times when you're so into what you're doing that you can't think about anything else? The days when you read half a dozen chapters, write 1,000 words, or finish a work assignment without looking up once. And when you do, you notice, like, hey, it's only dark outside. The day's almost gone. I've been working here, and time just kind of went away. And how would you feel like that every day? Well, you can, thanks to ℹABOUT. Psychologists call that feeling of being in the zone flow state. That's the optimal level of consciousness where you can perform at your best. ℹABOUT helps you achieve flow state and supports other aspects of cognitive function for better memory, focus, and mental processing. It can help you remember names and places, focus on complex tasks, think more clearly under stress, and react more quickly. With its trademarked ingredient blends, ℹABOUT builds an environment in which the brain can operate on all cylinders and protect its functioning for lasting mental clarity. Learn more about it at Onnit through the link on thepolarizer.com, because if you get to Onnit.com through that link, you'll get up to 10% off. I think it was actually 15 at this point. Well, it's either 10 or 15. Like you get a nice amount of money off when you place your first order through our affiliate link on thepolarizer.com. And if you don't like it, you just get your money back. You don't even have to send it back. That's how much they trust their product. So go to thepolarizer.com and click the link on the website to go to onnit.com, or use the promo code Polarizer on checkout to get that little discount. And finally, if you go to thepolarizer.com, you'll see an Amazon button there. And if you click on that, you'll land on Amazon, just like you always do. But the only difference is, if you place your order, we get a little kickback on that order. It doesn't cost you anything extra. Amazon just pays us a little bit every time we place an order after landing on Amazon through our website, because we brought you to them. That's basically how it works. It comes out at Amazon's end, so your price doesn't change. So next time you're ordering anything on Amazon, just go to polarize.com first and click on the link there to get to Amazon. And while you're on the polarizer.com, sign up for the newsletter so you never miss an episode. I send out an email every time I put out a new podcast episode, once every month, once every 2 months, so you will never get any spam. And that list is free, so why not? Polarize.com, sign up for the newsletter. My guest today is Dinosaur David B, as he's called on the website. He's a site host and editor of Dinosaur Rock Guitar.com. And this website, like I said in the beginning, is one of the first things I I found on the internet. Really, it's a website from the dial-up days. They recently had their 20th anniversary, and it's basically an encyclopedia of the biggest guitar heroes that ever lived. And it contains these very well written profiles of legendary guitar players like Jimmy Page and Slash and many others. And it was a delight to talk to him about music. David has a wealth of information on this subject, and I had an awesome time. And if you're a fan of rock music and heavy rock guitar, this podcast is for you. So enjoy, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, welcome everybody. Welcome to the Polarizer Podcast, and welcome Dave, Mr. Dave Barron.
Hey, hi. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming on. And you are the originator, I should say, of a website I've visited for a long time. I know it from the dial-up internet days. It's called DinosaurRockGuitar.com. And what mostly attracted me to it was the guitar alchemy, which are these profiles that are very well written on many of my favorite guitar heroes. And I discovered some new favorites through this website too. And it was my early teens back then, and I was interested in the guitar, and I knew some cool. I got some cool CDs from my uncle. He was a big music fan, and when the internet came around, I just went on the web and Googled, or back then it was probably, what was the dog again? The name of that? Oh
God, yeah.
It was before Google.
Those old search engines, yeah.
It was Alta Vista. You had
Alta Vista was one of them.
Yahoo.
I'm testing my memory now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Back when we had Netscape browsers and stuff like that. Yeah.
Netscape Navigator. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I landed on this website, Dinosaur Rock Guitar, and there's all these legendary guitar players that are classified by different dinosaurs. And you made that site. Why don't you tell me a little bit about it?
Yeah. So the site started in, I believe, November of 1999, and last November we just celebrated our 20th anniversary of being a website and a forum for 20 years.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you. When I look back at the things I've done in my life, it sort of is kind of shocking that this little website I put together 20 years ago with just, when I first started, a few pages of content, would end up being sort of like so significant in terms of impacting my life, in terms of the people I've met through the website and become lifelong friends with and things like that. But it came out of this idea. At that time, I had taken some hiatus off from playing, and I was getting back into playing, and I was trying to find people who liked the same kind of guitar style that I like, which is heavy rock, melodic metal, that was popular from, say, the late 60s through, say, the arrival of Yngwie Malmsteen. That period where, guitar heroes walked the earth in great abundance, and they were, encompassing all of the, the wonder of the raising of the bar during the early 80s, with Van Halen and people who were his contemporaries, where everything became very guitar-centric. And what had happened was, that period came, that period went, people started getting in, the hair metal thing, and then the all of that stuff started to become unfashionable again, and a lot of people who were playing that style of music started switching to, like, doing Stevie Ray Vaughan kind of blues, and they were turning in their Marshalls, and they were turning in, their heavy metal gear to, buy, Strats and matchless amplifiers and Stevie Ray Vaughan hats, and a lot of that was going on. And there was sort of a rebellion against that among a certain class of us players who just said, look, no offense to Stevie Ray Vaughan, I think everybody can agree he was a wonderful player and we like his work, but that's not what we want, and that's not where we want to live, and that's, we still, come from this other background of, a more dramatic form of music where, we had all of these glorious players at one time, and we still have some of them, which is great. But the thing was, I was looking for people who were like me, and I was going on web forums like the Fender Forum, and trying to talk about Richie Blackmore, and trying to talk about Gary Moore when he was still a rocker, and trying to talk about these guys, and most of them were all into things like David Gilmour, Mark Knopfler, all of these guys who were not playing in that sort of style. Eric Clapton on a Strat, not Cream Eric Clapton, who was really fiery, but like...
So it was two different guys, those two.
It was, yeah, absolutely. So that forum was like, I'd find one or two people who were like, yeah, we love Richie Blackmore. Yeah, we love Jeff Beck. We love, we love this heavier stuff. But, it was a small percentage of people on that forum who were really into that style of music, and the other players of that genre. So at that time it was sort of like, you take that sort of notion, if you build it they will come, it's the old quote from the movie, and I built a tiny little website with a forum and a couple of pages of content, basically sort of to try and find folks like me who wanted to, talk about and still play this style of music that, as I said, it's sort of 70s heavy rock and early 80s melodic metal, that kind of thing. And I built it, and they came. And one of the things that drew them in, it really did become the bait, were these alchemy profiles that you mentioned. What it is I would break down... I didn't write all of them, but I edited all of them so that they all sort of have a similar feel and everything. But I wrote like 95% of them about all of the guitarists who were stylistically important to this genre. And it would be a pretty fairly exhaustive enterprise. And back then, we were still thinking in terms of like text. Write everything in text. Don't, the idea of showing a video at the bottom of the page was sort of like, oh yeah, we should probably try and do that too. But, the idea was this was still a text-based world at that time in 1999. It's not that they didn't have videos online and all that stuff, but for the most part, when I would do interviews with players and name players and things like that, I would always write them out, as opposed to what we're doing right now, where you're going to have, a video of me actually talking to you. I would be transcribing that in those days. Right.
But it's all very, very well written, so it's,
Well, I am a writer by profession. In my real life, I am
that makes
a technical writer. Yeah, I'm a technical writer. I have a background in professional writing. I wrote for magazines. I've written, for, journalistic kinds of things before. So I have a strong background in writing. So I had an idea of the kinds of things I wanted to cover when I was designing these things. And what I found was I could spend, it typically took about 12 hours at least to do one of these profiles.
Oh, I believe that.
From like listening to the music to sort of like taking your notes and saying, okay, what's he doing on this particular thing? What do I hear across this player's work that are common trademarks of what he, his style? What are these things? So it'd be, you'd spend a lot of time listening and then writing it down as notes. And then I created sort of a format that was almost a template of how I wanted to organize each of these articles based on this player's strengths, their weaknesses, their influences, their style, all of these kinds of things. And, nowadays people will demonstrate this stuff in YouTube, but my medium was always words. And the more of these I ended up putting up on the website, the more people I attracted, because people were starting to look, they would start to search for players they liked, and they would start to find the hits coming from my website. And, they could learn, they'd read about some player that they liked, and they'd learn something, or they'd at least agree with what I wrote in most cases. There were, occasionally people would say, I don't, agree with that. But for the most part, everyone was, saying, this is great. We really like what you did here. How do I join your forum? That was sort of how the website started and grew. These alchemy profiles that you're talking about, they're still up. They're a little dated now. I try to update them a little bit, but I'm not like super serious about keeping them completely up to date.
Oh, a lot of these profiles, I don't think. I like Jimi Hendrix's profile. You don't need to update that one.
No, but somebody like Vivian Campbell, who was missing in action for 20 years, finally goes back and starts playing Dio songs again after Ronnie dies. Right? Well, he hasn't played like this in forever. Jakey Lee, another guy, no one's heard him for 20 years. He was out of the picture. No one even knew how to find him, where to look for him or anything. All of a sudden he comes back, he starts playing again, and now he's got a new band, of course. And it's like, okay, so I need to maybe make an update, right? Say, oh, he's back. Some of this stuff, because I used to, some of these people, I tried to also poke fun at them where I felt it was warranted.
Yeah, there's
it's not, I tried to make it, a little edgy, but also not like I wasn't going at them full bore.
Right.
But it was, it's like I would call them out for, I called Eric Clapton out for never playing like he played in Cream again, and things like that.
That's a good point,
Yeah. So anyway, we ended up with, I forget how many of these we have total. It's
quite a lot.
A fair amount. I want to say something like approaching 60 of them.
Yeah.
And I had some, at that time back then I had some people working with me who were sort of like admins on the site, and they would also write some if they felt strongly about them. But even when they were writing them, they were working very closely with me to make sure it captured the same sort of voice and spirit of the thing. And they'd say, oh, well, this guy's got this, this, and this. And I would say, yeah, but you forgot this and that. You got to add that too. And they were like, oh, yeah, you're right. I forgot that, And so it was a collaborative effort on a small portion of them. But for the most part, I wrote them. And like I said, I made sure that when I edited them, they flowed as they would. And for anyone who's interested, you go to dinosaurrockguitar.com and click on alchemy, and you can see they're sorted alphabetically, and you can see who we've got, and what we've written about them. And I'm an analytical person by nature, so I am very much, as a musician and as a guitarist, when I hear people whose playing I like, I try to pick it apart and see why I like it, and why it works, why what they're doing works, why it speaks to me, and what can I steal from it. So it's basically those kinds of things, whether it's, something about a technique, something about a sound, that's how I tend to digest music and instrumentalists and people like that. And so that's how that came about. And like I said, they've been there for a while. They still draw people to the site.
How many visitors do you get per week?
I haven't looked at the stats in quite a long time.
I bet it's quite a few, man. There's a lot of, I think Google still likes good text,
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I can tell you that over the 20-year period, I think our peak of engagement was around 2008. And since then, it's sort of tapered off again. And it's mostly now a forum for people who already know each other. We don't get too many new requests anymore. Back in the day, I had seen what had gone on at websites that grew too large too fast and became flame wars and all of that. Yeah. And I was determined to not let that happen to my site, even if it meant it was going to be smaller, because I'm not really trying to sell anything here. I'm not, this is not about me making a business out of this. I've turned down the opportunity in the past to put advertising on the site. I I don't think for the amount of money it would put in my pocket, it's worth cluttering up the site with a bunch of advertising. So I've kept it clean, I've kept it pure, and as such, there are consequences to that sort of mentality where we didn't grow by leaps and bounds. We grew for a while, and then it settled down, and sometimes people come and go, and they don't post for several years, and then they come back. That's fine. But it's a small community of people who genuinely now sort of know and care about each other and have been interacting with each other in many cases for many years.
That's cool. And where did the dinosaur part come from? For some reason, it's appropriate for rock, but I don't know why. But it sounds like it fits.
Yeah, it does. And you go back to when I was talking about when I was trying to find people like myself. And I would go to local jams in my area, which at that time was Boston. And I'd try to find guys who wanted to play heavy rock or melodic metal, and they didn't want to do it, and they just they wouldn't do it. And I'm trying to get them to play something by Black Sabbath or something by Rainbow, and it's like, no, let's do Sissy Strut again, let's do Hey Joe again, and I'd just be like, oh God, not this again. And I was like bitching about this to a friend of mine, and he said, you can't go to those jams. He said those people don't understand. You're a dinosaur. They don't understand you. They don't understand that. You're a dinosaur. And I started thinking about that. You're right. I'm a dinosaur in that respect. How do I make that a positive term rather than a negative connotation, right? So I started thinking about that. Yeah, I'm a dinosaur. When I plug in a guitar, I want to rip your head off. Absolutely. And I want to roar loud and be bold and everything. And I started gelling this concept that, like, okay, when you're generally called a dinosaur in music, it's not a good thing. It's generally a bad connotation. It's you're dated. But it's like, what if we take this as a badge of honor and make it a point of pride that we still want to play like this, and we still think there's value in this sort of guitar style and this sort of music. So I embraced it rather than pushing it away, and try to sort of think, how can I make this cool? Everybody likes dinosaurs anyway from the time you're a kid, right? So I took that name, and I started building up some of that folklore of, like, what can I do to sort of run with this idea. And part of that is, like, we designed this logo.
Yeah, it's a cool logo.
With a T-Rex playing a flying V, and it started to really sort of take shape, and we started looking at the players in the Alchemy profiles. I did, and I started thinking, we could classify these players, as you said, by different kinds of dinosaurs and stuff, because dinosaurs lived for a zillion years over different periods. You had Cretaceous, you had Jurassic, you had Triassic periods. These are millennia, over millions and millions of years, and the classes of dinosaurs changed. And I realized that it wasn't necessarily fair to compare somebody like Leslie West with someone like Eddie Van Halen,
right?
Or someone like Steve Lukather or George Lynch, or somebody who had a different level of facility on the instrument. How do you compare a Pete Townsend to a Paul Gilbert?
Yeah,
they're doing completely.
Yeah,
they're doing completely different things.
Yeah,
and it's I'm not making a value judgment that one is better or worse than the other.
Yeah, that's endless discussions you sometimes hear. Like, one person says, "Well, I'm a fan of Jimmy Page," and another guy says, "Well, I'm a fan of what's the guy from Dream Theater?"
John Petrucci.
Yeah, John Petrucci. Yeah, he's way faster and more accurate. Well, yeah, that's
so what?
True. But,
where's his cashmere?
Yeah, exactly. yeah. So
I'm a fan of both of those guys. I'm a fan of Pete Townsend and a fan of Paul Gilbert for completely different reasons. And by the way, Paul Gilbert's a huge Pete Townsend fan. and a huge Jimmy Page fan, for what it's worth. So it depends on what you value in someone's playing, you know. And there are players who, you know, we all seem to agree on at my forum, and there are others that most of them, there are people that we don't particularly care for, and then there are guys where it's like, you know, a segment likes them, a segment doesn't get it, or whatever.
Right.
But anyway, the point was, I started thinking of this in terms of like, okay, the guys who were in the 60s, like the first four big names who are always Hendrix, Beck, Page, and Clapton. This style of music goes back to those four guys. Okay? It doesn't go back as far as Keith Richards. He's not a lead player in that respect. It doesn't go back as Pete Townsend. He's not a lead player in that respect. The real, for like what we are talking about is the first loud, technically proficient lead players.
Yeah. Like the guys who
in
would
rock.
blow your head
Right.
off.
Right.
Yeah.
With tone and with technique, and it's those first four guys. So I started thinking about that. I started thinking, okay, well, Hendrix and Clapton are in that era of the late 60s. They're not really metal yet.
No.
They're sort of like psychedelia and volume and, you know, for its time, brilliant chops.
Yeah.
So that's sort of like proto. It's not, you know, when you see these things like, you know, these big tables of all the genres of metal and stuff like that the guy does such a great job. I can't remember his name. The guy who does the videos, the documentaries, and he classifies all these different genres. Those guys, to me, and Pete Townsend. Pete Townsend was the first guy to really be loud and to really embrace feedback and to really embrace, you know, the concept of really wanting to sonically destroy his audience with loud, obnoxious, you know, not just sounds, but playing with feedback, playing with distortion in ways that we hadn't heard prior to that. So I'm thinking these guys to myself, it's like I can classify these as like, if I'm going to make this analogy, these would be our earliest dinos.
All right. So those are the, let's see.
So if you want to look it up, I can't remember what he called it, but it's like I put them in one class.
Sauropod. Is that the one?
Yeah.
Or that? No, hold on. Those are the Dinosaur Rock Guitar players who were primarily rhythm players.
Yeah.
I'm on the Dinosaur page now.
Yeah, you're right. You have the legend there, as it were, the key.
Right. You got Triassic, Jurassic, and let's see, Cretaceous. I don't know.
Cretaceous.
Cretaceous. Oh my God, I messed it up.
Anyway, so like, you know, you learn something here too. So I mean, it's like little natural history for your for your side dish, if you will. But you know, it was just sort of a way of sort of classifying them so that you understand that, like, this group have these qualities in common, this other group have these qualities in common. You know, you get past Hendrix, Clapton, Beck, and Page, and you get into guys like, you know, Iommi and Blackmore. You know, but everything that this site really goes back down to of the style of music that we are always talking about generally goes back to Zeppelin, Sabbath, and Purple.
Right.
Those are really the start of the glory era of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I made those guys, all three of those guys are like T-Rexes because they're like, you know, really the progenitors of this whole style of music. And then you got into like the late 70s and guys who were raising the bar with technique, whether it was Uli Roth or Michael Schenker and later Van Halen and, you know, guys like that. You know, I put them in a different class because they were, you know, clearly better lead players in some respects because they were, you know, taking it a little further.
Right.
And I don't want to be clear here. Technical ability, not in terms of like the quality of, I mean, you know, of what they played,
like
but just in terms of a different level of technique.
They brought something different to the table in terms of,
in terms of guitar technique. I'm not, you know, you can make that case that, you know, they had better technique than a Jimmy Page. It's hard to make that case against Blackmore. Blackmore had plenty of technique, but you know, generally speaking, this is not this was not a
it's not a contest or anything.
Right, and it's not like super black and white, and it's just like sort of a fun way to sort of think of the classification, going back to using the concept of embracing the name of Dinosaur Rock Guitar and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's not serious. It's not it's not something worth arguing over with people. It's nothing like that. It was just sort of like a fun way to sort of try and classify for people who didn't know, for people who were coming. It's like, who are Akira Takasaki's peers? That kind of thing. It's not Eric Clapton.
So who were the first guitar players who you wrote profiles on?
I don't remember what order I did them in. I mean, there may be some indication on the copyright line of when I did them, but I think the first ones I did work on were the most important guys, like Page, Blackmore, and Iommi.
All right.
And from there, I started stretching out into the guys who meant most to me, who I knew their stylistic trademarks inside and out, so I didn't have to go back and do a lot of research. So, because I knew it inherently, like Gary Moore and Michael Schenker and people like that, who I was listening to all the time, and who were huge influences on my own playing. I knew how to write their profiles without having to do a ton of extra research. There were other people who I didn't listen to that frequently or that carefully, who I had to actually sit and go back and say, I need to actually do some serious listening before I write this, so I know what I'm talking about. But those were some of the first ones, yeah.
Cool. So, and what would you... so I can tell it's written by someone who likes music, who loves music, and who's a musician himself, and that was what drew me to the site. I think I found it probably after Googling Slash, because he was my inspiration for picking up the guitar. And as I was reading it, I was like, oh man, yeah, he is really that cool. And I agreed with everything I read there, and that's where I kind of went further down the rabbit hole. Yeah.
His was one I actually did have to update later, because over time, Slash is one of the few people who got better.
Yeah.
He's a better player now than he was when Appetite for Destruction landed. He has been constantly working on his playing. He has embraced the influence of his Michael Schenker influence is now much easier to pick up in his more recent playing than it was back then. Back then, he was when he first burst onto the scene. You got to understand, people who are older than you, like me, we had seen pretty much everything Slash was doing in Aerosmith already,
right?
And to a degree, you get Guns N' Roses, you get a very heavy Aerosmith influence combined with sort of a punk influence,
right? Well, and I was a Guns N' Roses fan first, and then I also got into Aerosmith, and I always, I really listened to all their albums, and I like the early ones the best.
Sure.
But yeah, I did find Guns N' Roses a better overall band, but that's of course personal taste. But I'm not sure if you agree or disagree with that.
I think Guns N' Roses was one of those classic cases where they got too much success too soon,
right.
And it sort of destroyed the band.
For didn't last very long.
Yeah. So you're comparing, a small number of releases to Aerosmith's catalog, where if you compare it, if you start looking at Aerosmith post Rocks, they're starting to fall apart. The drugs are starting to show up in the musical quality. Right. Until, so by the time you get to Draw the Line and, Night in the Ruts, you're talking about a band that's nowhere near what they were when they were hitting on all cylinders.
Right.
And, so, you're comparing a catalog that's this big to a catalog that's maybe this big, and you're saying, well, Guns N' Roses is at that level for their whole thing. But if they had stayed together and had, all of their drug problems while they were still a band, you may have seen the quality drop off. I mean, we're not talking about Chinese democracy here, right? So,
what's your opinion on that album?
I think, that's one of those things where it's just like, sort of an example of madness and an example of being so up your own ass for so long without any checks and balances of people saying, snap out of it,
Right.
It's I listened to that when an album came out. I listened to it once or twice just to make sure I was sure that I was not interested in it at all. So that said, I think some of Slash's Snake Pit stuff is really good.
Yeah.
And I think some of the stuff, I'm not a huge Miles Kennedy fan, but I think some of the music he's been putting out under the name Slash has been really good. And like I said, he is a better, more facile player now than he was in 1987, 88.
Right.
And, so I did go back and mention that in his profile years later that, he never stopped learning. He never stopped practicing. He kept going. He kept getting better. I admire that. Because there's not a lot of people you can say that about.
Yeah.
Most of these guys have lost something, and in the best case scenario, they've stayed the same. But how many of these people that we revered actually, progressed over time?
Yeah,
and got better.
Yeah, not many.
Jeff Beck did. Jeff Beck's a much better and much more interesting player now than he was when he was in the Yardbirds.
And I never really got into Jeff Beck solo stuff. I mean, instrumental rock is kind of it's you either like it or you don't. And I mean,
yeah,
if I listen to it, I admire it, but I have a hard time just kind of rocking out to it, and it doesn't make me want to drive faster.
No, it's not that kind of music. Yeah. For the most part. But if you look at it from a pure guitaristic sort of standpoint, everyone over a certain age will rightfully or wrongfully tell you that the greatest thing that ever happened to guitar is Jimi Hendrix, and no one ever took it any further than Jimi Hendrix. Well, that's not true post-1980. Jeff Beck took it further. Jeff Beck is doing things on guitar that Hendrix couldn't have dreamed of. And this is not a slag on Jimi Hendrix, but the man died. Okay? So Jeff Beck kept playing. Jeff Beck dropped the pick and started using all of his fingers and getting these different tones and these different techniques. And he's really created a unique guitar style that is purely him. Yeah. And it's way advanced. I mean, if you're a guy who just plays with a pick, you can't do that stuff. Right? And it's a remarkable use of the instrument in a completely original way.
Yeah.
That is, in my opinion, leagues beyond anything what Hendrix did on the instrument. Now, Hendrix was a way better songwriter than Jeff Beck. Hendrix's music, you could argue, is more accessible than Jeff Beck's music. But just from the position of advancing guitar to a level that no one else is approaching. It's not so much his left hand and speed and stuff like that. It's about sonics. It's about creating, different dynamics with the instrument and all of this stuff that he manages to get between. If you ever watch him play, it's watch him live and you see what he does with the guitar, where he's constantly got the whammy bar under his hand, and he's working the volume knob with his pinky, and he's plucking the strings with these fingers, and the left hand is not doing anything specifically difficult. But what he manages to coax out of that instrument sonically is completely different than, these guys who can shred like nothing, like Petrucci and Paul Gilbert. Those guys are wonderful in a different way.
Right.
But at a certain point, we all look at Jeff Beck and we go, oh my God, how's he doing that? The intonation, all of this stuff that is just uniquely him. Okay? So, I mean, I could play I could show you a zillion people you've never heard of playing Paul Gilbert licks. Right? And playing them as well or as fast. And there's 9-year-olds on YouTube doing it. It's a fairly mechanical, robotic thing to get that. But no one's doing what Jeff Beck's doing with guitar. And
what's did he? What's a good example of another famous player that was clearly inspired by him?
Gary Moore was inspired by him, also by Hendrix, also by Peter Green. Steve Lukather, huge Jeff Beck fan. You don't hear it so much in his playing directly. Joe Perry, big Jeff Beck fan. I think all of the guys that we talk about, I don't think there's anyone. Dave Gilmour is a huge Jeff Beck fan. Jimmy Page is a huge Jeff Beck fan. Now, you're talking about other guitarists, and you're talking about, you didn't personally, it didn't speak to you musically, and I understand that because some of it is very jazzy.
Right.
And he typically writes with other people because he's not a writer.
Well, it's kind of the same with guys like God, what's the guy's name who did the solo albums with David Lee Roth?
Steve Vai.
Steve Vai, yeah, Steve Vai, and the guy who taught him. I don't know why the names are slipping me.
Oh,
now.
Satriani.
Yeah,
Satriani.
And those two guys. Whenever I listen to their music, it blows my mind how quick they are. And I tried. I mean, I looked at the sheet music a couple times and tried to play along. And even if at half speed, I was like, oh my god, it's no way I'm gonna ever keep up with those guys. And when I listen to it, it just impresses me, and I could never touch it personally, but.
But do you enjoy it more than AC/DC?
No.
So there you go.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really sort of the question. It's like, so this is another thing that we tend to talk about at my website anyway. It's like there is stuff that impresses your brain, and there's stuff that like reaches south of your belt and says, makes you want to throw your fist in the air.
Yes.
And rock out.
Yeah.
Okay. And the best guys can do both.
Right.
All right. The best guys will give you that visceral, oh yeah, I love this song. I love this riff. It moves me. And yet when you get to the part where they need to impress you technically, they do that too.
Eddie Van Halen
right?
is one of those guys for me.
He's one of those guys that, for me personally, and I know this is blasphemous, as wonderful as he is, his lead style doesn't really do much for me. It's
really?
It's a little bebopish. I appreciate it, but I prefer things a little more melodic and a little bit more sexual, if you will, in terms of its impact and its ability to coax other emotions out of me. I'm not trying to rag on it. I'm just saying, for all of the wondrous stuff that he does, it doesn't have an emotional impact on me like some other players' styles do. Doesn't mean I don't love Van Halen. I do. But to me, he's not a particularly satisfying melodic player.
What would be like someone who would do both of those?
Michael Schenker.
Okay. Yeah.
Somebody like that. Michael Schenker is wonderfully melodic. Everything he plays is melodic. He's got great chops as well. When I'm talking about Schenker, I'm not talking about the last bunch of years. I'm talking about when he was in his prime from like 1974 to 84, when he was really creating masterful solos that had, that really told a story that had a beginning, a middle, and an end.
What's
a good example? Anything from that era. Listen to the solo in Lost Horizons. Listen to the solos on his first two solo albums, and most of the UFO stuff. There are tons of examples in that period. He doesn't play that way anymore. He still has all of the technical ability, but he used to compose solos that had a beginning, a middle, and an end. And it was like a song within a song. It had an arc like a song has an arc.
Right.
Okay. And to me, that was more influential on my playing personally than Eddie, who was just sort of like, grooving along like a horn player almost.
Yeah.
He was very influenced. Eddie was very influenced by Allan Holdsworth, who was very influenced by a sax player named John Coltrane, who, Holdsworth would take John Coltrane's saxophone solos and transcribe them for guitar, and he'd learn how to play them on guitar.
Oh, wow.
And then Eddie responded very much to that. But I mean, you're talking about bebop jazz now,
Right.
and it's one of those things where it either connects with you or it doesn't. Whether you're getting it from Eddie or if you're getting it from Holdsworth or you're getting it from John Coltrane.
Isn't Holdsworth the guy who has like the weird guitar without a headstock, like the?
Yeah, he had one of them. I mean, that wasn't always his guitar, but I mean, towards the end, he had something like that.
I think
And by the way,
Yeah,
he was a brilliant player. But I mean, again, the music isn't like accessible for the masses. It's for guitar geeks.
Yeah. Yeah, I looked him up based off that Eddie Van Halen profile, and he's playing with a jazz band, and he's doing these amazing.
He's not a rock player.
No,
yeah, he's not a rock player. There's a lot of great players out there who are not rock players, but the focus of the guitar style that we have always revered at our site, another guy like that who plays brilliantly melodically and is ridiculous chops, as well as Uli Roth, who used to be in the Scorpions and now has a solo career for a long time. And
if I look away, I'm looking at my second screen. Well, I have the website
fine.
up here, so I'm kind of reading.
There's lots of these people. Gary Moore's solos when he was a rock player were always ridiculously wonderful. He was a guy who also injected such intensity into everything he played, every note he played, and his solos were compositional. They too had a beginning, a middle, and an end, and he'd usually try to end on some kind of a high note, a crescendo, or something like that. And to me, like I said, that resonated more with my personal style of how I approach guitar than somebody like Eddie, who was certainly much more I guess, experimental and jazzy and willing to do things that were just, they were certainly less conventional.
Right. Oh, what attracted me to Eddie Van Halen is because it's also got a lot of humor, his playing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. There's a lot of that too. And, Steve Vai gets a lot of that from Eddie and from Frank Zappa, working with Frank Zappa.
Yeah.
There's a lot of humor in their styles, and I think that's a wonderful thing. And like I said, I'm not trying to say I don't like Van Halen. I do, but I'm just saying he was never like a guy whose playing I wanted to emulate.
Right.
I appreciate it, but it wasn't what I wanted to. Wasn't in the direction of where I wanted to go. There were other players who were his contemporaries who I enjoyed more. So,
who was your favorite player of all time, if you can pick one?
It's very hard to pick one. And again, I have to sort of break it out in sort of a. Again, the question is, for what particular aspect are we talking about?
Right.
So, like I said, if I really want to be honest, and want to say, what do I want to achieve as a guitarist, as a musician, as a producer? I want to achieve what Jimmy Page achieved. Right. I want to write the songs myself. I want them to be great songs. I want to play them myself. I want to produce them in the studio myself, and have total creative control over everything. And I don't think anybody's songs are better than theirs. I think there are other bands that I love equally. But I don't think anyone's songs were better. I don't think anyone's compositions were better. I think most of his choices were marvelous. I think his lead playing was marvelous, even when it was sloppy. So like I said, I go back to Jimmy Page, I go back to Tony Iommi, I go back to Richie Blackmore for a lot of the foundation of the style of music I enjoy most and what I like to play most. And that's compositionally. But if I want to talk about lead style, particular lead style, just lead style, the guys I've always had at the top of my mountain are Gary Moore Michael Schenker. And neither of them are the songwriters that Page is, that Iommi is, that Blackmore is. You know, their lead style is the most exciting to me.
Right.
So that aspect of their playing is where I sort of like, that's what I pursued in my own style. That sort of style of having, you know, a lot of melodicism, a lot of balls, work on my vibrato to make sure that that's tasty as hell. And, you know, those kinds of things were like, those are the things I learned from those guys. I learned different things from different guys. And, you know, there's a lot of people out there who I've stolen this from that one. I've stolen that from that one. You know, I like this Jimi Hendrix voicing of this chord. I like that Jake E. Lee voicing of that chord. You know, you sort of assimilate the best of what it is that it turns you on, and it becomes your own style because of the way you mix it together.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's, you mentioned Jimmy Page, and I think, I still haven't met anyone who likes rock music who doesn't just default back to Led Zeppelin as an example. Like, hey man, that's where it all really started.
My wife has often said, "I don't trust anyone who doesn't like the Beatles," and I feel, and we both, and we.
My wife would actually agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, how can you not like the Beatles? What planet are you living on? It's like, and it's to a degree that's also true of Led Zeppelin, and it's like, how can you not like this if you appreciate anything? And I know, and I have friends I know who are not huge Zeppelin fans, but you know.
It's difficult to get into. It's not that accessible, I think.
I thought it was pretty accessible. I mean, the thing I've often heard, and it was also, by the way, it was true of Rush as well. Sometimes the singer turns you off.
Yeah. Okay.
It was certainly true of Rush in a lot of respects, but it was also true. People did in the early days. They weren't expecting Robert Plant's voice. They weren't expecting anything like that. And I think there are people who just don't respond to that,
or they're scared of it, maybe, which is valid.
Maybe, or they find it great, or whatever it is. And then there were the people who said, "Oh, you know, Jimmy Page, he's sloppy," and then blah blah blah. And it's like, yeah, you know, that's not the point. It's not about, everything doesn't have to be clean and pristine all the time. There's a lot of this. It's about attitude. It's about mood. It's about ideas, and it's about, you know, more than that, you know, constructing complex arrangements and, you know, tracking multiple guitar parts to create a canvas that is much more deep. And, you know, like I said earlier, if you just, you know, if you Google what Paul Gilbert has said about Jimmy Page, you'll be astounded. It's like, you know, everybody of that era, they sort of revere him, as did I. You know, remarkable achievements in so many areas of like, not just guitar work, but also in composition, in production. He was a very early pioneer. Drums didn't sound like drums before Jimmy Page.
Yeah, he put a drum kit in an empty building, I think, in a bathroom.
He knew how he was blessed with a drummer like Bonham, but he also knew how, from his session days, to record drums so that it didn't sound like cardboard boxes anymore. If you compare the drum sounds on Led Zeppelin 1 to every other album, you can go back, it's like Zeppelin 1, I think, came out in 1968. If you go and search Wikipedia for albums of 1968, and you look at the other albums from bands that were supposedly heavy bands at that time.
Yeah.
And you look at studio albums, not live albums, but studio albums. Find me a drum sound that's anything like what's on Zeppelin 1.
Yeah.
And you won't be able to do it. And that's Jimmy. And, you know, all of these pioneering sort of practices that he pioneered in the studio, certainly he was the one who made them famous, whether or not, you know, because he probably learned them from other people from earlier sessions and things like that. but he knew how to do it and he knew how to get it. And then he was blessed with this band of absolute gods in his band.
And John Bonham, he was also just incredible.
Oh my God. Yeah. I mean, but the point is, I think, he doesn't get enough credit as a producer. And he's one of the best producers of all time for rock, certainly. All of that stuff you hear on Whole Lotta Love, all that backwards echo, all of that stuff, the phase shifter, putting the phase shifter on the drums, things like that on certain drum fills in Kashmir, you're hearing phase shifter on the drums. Those are techniques that, I don't think they came from anyone but him.
And all that psychedelic break and Whole Lotta Love, that's also really something. I mean...
Right. The minute you're wearing headphones and you're listening to that, and by the way, I was doing that when I was 16 years old, and listening to that, just going, oh my God. And, the sonic architecture, the idea of layering guitars on top of guitars, you have songs that have, an acoustic bedding that you don't even necessarily think about. So you have a song like Over the Hills and Far Away that's got a 6-string acoustic, it's got a 12-string acoustic, and it's got electric, and you're painting with this canvas, and it to make sure that this, as the song progresses, it continually gets bigger and more anthemic and more dramatic and more dynamic. And a lot of that sort of innovation for the style of rock that they pioneered, it came right out of Jimmy's head. All of those guys became templates for everything that came later. This is what a rock singer should look and sound like. This is what a guitar player should be looking like on stage in a rock band. You should have a Les Paul slung around your knees. It's like it was a template, and this is what your drummer should sound like. And your bass player should be able to do freaking everything. Yeah. Everything.
Yeah,
and
that guy was also something, man.
They were all such serious badasses.
Yeah. How many instruments did he play?
He was one of those guys, he was kind of like Brian Jones in the Stones, that anything you handed him, he could probably play. He plays the recorder part on Stairway to Heaven in the intro. He plays the recorder. He plays the mellotron. He plays, any keyboard instrument you can manage. But then he also, there's videos of him on YouTube, like going on, TV shows and doing like Zeppelin songs on mandolin and stuff. And, obviously any stringed instrument as well. So, you have, a guy who's the utility man. Anything you needed to throw at him, he'd play it. And, they'd do a 3-hour show, and an hour in the middle of it would be a pure acoustic set. And
man, if I had a time machine,
yeah.
You ever saw him live, Zeppelin?
I was not able. I had tickets for the tour that they were doing when Bonham died.
Oh man.
Yeah, so I never got to see them myself live. I know people who did. And fortunately now we have some really strong video footage. And it's funny, the other thing that I see these days is there's a lot of people on YouTube doing, young people, younger than yourself, I think, doing reaction videos to rock music.
Yeah.
And that's wonderful because it's coming full circle.
Or hip-hop fans who listen to Led Zeppelin for the first time. No, we got a bit of a connection problem. Oh, are you still there?
Yeah, it dropped for a minute.
Let's see, I can hear you, but I can't see you.
My video is supposedly on.
Let's see. Come on. I'm going to pour myself
Yours is not yet.
Let's pour myself another glass in the meantime because it's Friday.
Sure. Me too.
Here we go. We're back.
Yeah.
Let's see, we're talking about...
So I was saying there's a whole bunch of people whose minds now, these young people, are discovering Zeppelin and Queen and Purple and
Pink
all
Floyd.
of these bands, Pink Floyd to a degree, Rush. They're all madly in love with Rush. I think this is a wonderful, wonderful thing that's happening, because when young people start getting back into this music and realizing, oh my God, the stuff that they're feeding me now in the industry is horrible compared to this.
Yeah, I don't know if it's just me or if it's like a typical thing when but that starts coming up when you get older. I mean, I'm in my early 30s, so I guess I'm not super young anymore. But is it just me, or is just music just getting worse and worse? I mean,
it's not just you. It's not just you. First of all, you can make a case that every decade from the 60s on gets less and less melodic.
Right.
The 60s were more melodic than the 70s. The 70s were more melodic than the 80s. By the time you get to the 80s and certainly into the 90s, you start getting rap and hip-hop way less melodic.
Rap metal and Limp Bizkit.
Right.
And, yeah.
All of that stuff is less melodic than what came before it. And then you start getting into this stuff where now, like, all of, most of the music you hear these days, if you get in an Uber and an Uber driver, I think by law they're required to play this garbage for you while you're in the car. But, everything seems like it's made by the same 3 or 4 people. All of the backing tracks have the same drum machines, the same production effects, the same exact sonics.
It's all auto-tuned.
Yeah, and they find, different little infantilized women voices. So they all have these little girl voices. They all sound like they're 14-year-old jailbait on purpose. They can hold a tune, but they don't sing like with power or anything like that. They don't have the big voice like perhaps a Christina Aguilera or something like that.
She could actually sing.
She has real freaking pipes.
Yeah.
But most people that you hear say, they're just kind of like whining, and they sound like little pouty little girls,
or it's gangster rap, or like angry shit,
But yeah, I mean, a lot of this stuff is industry created stuff where there's like 2 or 3 songwriters who write all of this material for these people, and they just crank it out like a factory. And the people who are doing these reaction videos, they're getting their minds blown when they see Freddie Mercury. I mean, they're getting their minds blown when they hear Led Zeppelin. They're getting their minds blown when they see Rush play live. And see them do what they do, and they realize, oh my God, what am I hearing in my own era at this time that is even remotely close to that kind of handcrafted music? And the answer is 0, nothing. So, they are. It's a really cool thing to watch a bunch of 20-somethings sit there and listen to a Thin Lizzy song and go, wow. or a Zeppelin song and go, oh my God. And it's funny, I was watching one the other night where it was this female reacting to Led Zeppelin, and she was watching Black Dog live from Madison Square Garden '73, watching Robert Plant slither across the stage, and you could see it's like, this woman is getting hot just watching this. Still, for over 50 years, they're still getting women hot. They're still, and then she watched another one, and she got this look on her face like, oh my God, I've missed all of it. Right. I've missed all of it. I can't believe this happened, and I'm stuck with Billie Eilish. It's just. So I think those kinds of things are happening, and it's really positive because. If it inspires anyone to start picking up instruments again and start recreating that kind of music where it's actually not electronically created, it's created with real instruments, and people being inspired to try and want to play that well again, I think that's a wonderful thing. I hope I live to see another generation of it.
Oh man, I hear you. I mean, I live in Europe, so like Western Europe, Netherlands, and here techno was a big thing. So it's people just go to these dark places with lasers and lights, and it's just kind of monotonous, doom, and everyone's on drugs.
My wife is a professional singer in that electronic dance music genre, and she's trying like hell to make it more about songs. And largely succeeding and doing really well in that, but it's like it's a different medium. It's for if you're talking about music for dance floors in nightclubs, it's really a completely different ball game.
It is, but I think like disco from the 70s and stuff like that. There's some real disco music there, and
because funk, they were still played by musicians,
especially
still
funk.
played. Right. They were still played by musicians. You still had real drums, real bass, real guitars, and real keys. It wasn't some producer out there programming a track on a laptop that someone will then go and, maybe sing over or something like that. Based on drum loops and all of these things. It was handcrafted. I mean, that I use that term. That was a term I heard Michael Schenker use a couple of years ago, where he was talking about still making handcrafted music. And it stuck with me because it's like, it's true. There's this completely different way of making music now, where you don't have to be a musician, really.
No.
It helps if you are. It helps if you're a guy who or a woman who knows how to play. But there are people out there who don't know how to play, who can make dance tracks fairly easily through trial and error with drum machine.
You still there?
I'm here now. Yep, it dropped again.
So you're on Wi-Fi?
Yeah, I just had my router and everything changed this week because I was having trouble. I don't think it dropped on my end.
Okay. Well,
it's hard to know, but I mean, anyway.
Yeah, it's definitely different kind of music. Yeah.
Yep.
But let's get back to the Dinosaur Rock Guitar.
Sure.
The website says that basically the guitar alchemy is complete. Like the profiles are finished. There's no more plans to add any of it because this is like the foundation of the history of it all. And are you gonna what if tomorrow like a new like super legend comes out of nowhere that just ticks all the boxes? Will you'll get into the honorable mentions part of the website, or?
If someone really truly came along, I'd consider doing it again. And 2 years ago, my wife was recovering from some surgery she had, and she was bored, and she was saying, I want to write one on Paul Gilbert, who was not part of the original set. And by that time, I was sort of like, we had almost started one once a long time ago on Paul, but we didn't really, it didn't get any traction. I hadn't been listening to him enough to know whether, at that point, I didn't feel qualified to write it. But over time, I listened to a lot more of him, and the things that I love about Paul Gilbert are not necessarily the things that a lot of people love about Paul Gilbert. So I said, one, sure, go ahead and write the thing, to my wife, who's also a good writer. And I edited it.
Let's see. There you are again.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, I said, go ahead and write the Paul Gilbert thing, draft it. I will add, she's not a guitarist. She's a pianist and a vocalist and a ridiculous musician, who has, degrees in music and everything. And so she wrote what she wanted to write about Paul, and I added the parts of what I thought were, hallmarks of his style and stuff. And we did that because, there was sort of like the impetus was there. She was, like I said, recovering from a surgery, and she wanted to do something like that. And I said, sure. I haven't had much inclination to add anyone else. And if someone came along, in the unlikely event that someone came along that warranted it, I think, sure.
What do you think of Joe
something like
Bonamassa?
That. I think this is a guy who's a really good player who can't write a rock riff to save his life. He's a blues guitarist who can solo for days, although I don't think he solos, for example, as well as Gary Moore does, even when Gary Moore is in a blues context. And the man clearly cannot write a rock riff to save his life. Doesn't mean he's not a great player. He's a great player. He certainly is. But, I mean, I watched when he was in the band with Glenn Hughes and Black Country Communion, and those songs were like Glenn Hughes songs.
Right.
Bass-written kinds of things. He was, in my opinion, the wrong guy for that band in a major way. in the way that Steve Morse is the wrong guy for Deep Purple, but he's not a rock guy, much as he tries, and it part of the definition of what the site has always been about is being a guy who is a riff writer guy, is a guy who comes up with, ballsy, heavy sort of things, and that's not Bonamassa.
No.
And he is a wonderful player in a lot of ways, but he's not a guy whose playing excites me.
Right.
Because I've seen better. I've seen guys who do what he does better, and it's not always about that. It's about I once saw Eric Johnson play. He's a wonderful player, but he bores me to tears. He has the stage presence of a potted plant, and it's not. You can appreciate a level of what he's been able to achieve on the instrument. But if the music doesn't speak to you, the music doesn't speak to you. And that's really the bottom line. It doesn't matter how good a player a guy is if what he does doesn't speak to you. And that's from, not just me, that's person to person. Everybody's got, there are people that, that their music speaks to them and other people that it doesn't.
Right. What about John Frusciante from the Red Hot Chili Peppers?
Also not really my thing. I don't have a lot of love for music of that era, even though they did start sort of in the 80s. I certainly acknowledge how good a bass player Flea is, and how amazing Chad Smith is, but their music doesn't really do much for me.
Kind of ends with you in the mid 80s, I guess. Yeah. Late
for
80s.
the most part, I would say that's a fair statement. And occasionally there are some things that come along that pique my interest, or occasionally some band will resonate with me for some reason. Usually not for the reasons that are like because I'm blown away by the guitar work. Usually it's more about the songwriting and things like that. So for me, it's still about if you have great songs. If your songs turn me on, I will likely be a fan, regardless of whether you have a hot guitar player in the band or not.
Right. So like a band like Oasis or something, like you would appreciate the songwriting, but not necessarily the
Right, except I don't. But yes, I mean that's not. So I'll give you an example. There's this band from I think they're from Denmark called the Blue Van.
The Blue Van. Okay.
The Blue Van. They are a rock band. They're a bunch of guys who have written some really great songs. They have several albums, of which at least 3 of them are really good. And they're songwriters, but like their lead players their lead guitarist is barely competent,
Okay.
and their singer has a quality to his voice. It's really much more of a pop thing. But they're playing rock music, they're playing it loud, they're playing it with attitude, and their songs are killer. I can't take away anything. So I enjoy that, but I don't enjoy it for the reasons I enjoy Deep Purple. I enjoy it for different reasons. And they're very they have had success by having like an Apple commercial. They got their music as one of the Apple commercials. I think they had their music as a theme song for a TV show or something like that. So they've had success through licensing.
It's not really rock and roll,
No, that band is really rock and roll. If you go listen to that, let me tell you what the name of the album was. Hang on.
No, I mean, there's this like famous legend around the Doors that they didn't want their music used for a car commercial.
Right. Yeah, if they were still around, they'd be dying for that commercial right now.
Are you a fan of the Doors?
I love the Doors. More earlier than later. I think they got. I don't think they ever topped their debut album. So there's the Blue Van had an album called Man Up and an album called Love Shot. Check those out when you get a chance. And I think you'll find that those songs are really good and really sticky, and they still rock. But it's not from, the school of, blazing guitar solos and stuff. It has nothing to do with that. It's just, more about, good songs.
Okay. Cool.
But the Doors, the Doors, they were really unique as well, and I like them until they go too far off the rails. I think it'd be hard to argue that they had one of the great debut albums of all times, along with like Jimi Hendrix and Van Halen. I mean, you're talking about bands whose arguably their best album was their first album. Even in the case of Van Halen, you could make that case. People may argue with you, but I think it's pretty clear that, the Doors' first album and Jimi Hendrix's first album were, among the strongest debut albums of all time.
Yeah.
And,
also,
so,
yeah.
You get into, after that, there's somewhat of a...
Appetite for Destruction.
Yeah, absolutely. Another one. Right. Where have they bested that? I mean,
yeah. You
can make that case. And, it's... This is all opinion, but I mean, these are my opinions. And I know that a lot of people think, if you look at, the strongest debut albums and stuff, a lot of bands don't have their first album as their strongest album. They get better as they go along.
Yeah.
But other bands, they come out with a huge thing. And like I said, I think if Guns N' Roses hadn't become stars overnight, they might have maybe lasted a little longer if they had to maybe work for it a little harder over that period, and they got so big so fast, and it went to their heads so easily that
all the drugs and the booze and the women.
Sure,
and,
sure. But I mean, but you look at contrast it with Metallica. Their first stuff isn't their best stuff necessarily. They start hitting their stride, a little later.
Yeah.
I mean, most people point to Master of Puppets or the Black Album as their best work.
A lot of people hate the Black Album too, though. Yeah,
that's just bullshit. It really is. That has some of the catchiest songs they ever wrote on it, and some of the best. If you can't appreciate great songs, I don't have a lot of time for those folks, because it's really about, if your songs are great, you win.
Right.
If your songs are great, you win. It doesn't matter how good your guitar player is. If your songs are great, you're going to win. Okay? Let's talk about how great George Harrison was as a lead player. He was a really great lead player, not in the technical sense, but he always played leads that were really good for the songs like Something and things like that, where the lead is a very short, little, quick thing. It's absolutely perfect. But, the songs, who can contest the songs?
Yeah, I think you'd be hard pressed to do that. You got Kirk Hammett on the website as well?
We never did Kirk. Not through any it wasn't a purposeful thing to leave him out, but by the time we had written a bunch of them, at the time we were doing them, I was getting tons of emails from people who were on the site and people who were just reading the site saying, "Oh, you got to do this guy. Oh, you got to do that guy. How could you leave this guy out? How could you leave that guy out?" And it was a real pain in the ass, frankly, because it was people were suggesting people that I wouldn't dream of covering, for the very reasons that we used to have a page. I don't even know if we still have it up or not, but who is and who is not a Dino guitarist.
I remember reading that page.
Yeah, and it was I had to put that up sort of as a sort of don't come to me and
dinosaur.
Yeah, right. So I had to put that up because people were coming to me asking me to review guys I would never review, because they didn't really fit the thing. Like David Gilmour. He is not a riff writer. He is not a technician on lead guitar. He's a wonderful guitarist for what he does, but he doesn't fall into that. I love Keith Richards. I love the Rolling Stones, but that is not this style of music.
Right.
He is not that kind of lead player.
It needs to be like a guitar hero type of guy.
It has to be a guy with that attitude that when he straps on a guitar, he wants to lop your head off.
Right.
With it. And he's a gunslinger. He wants to, and he's not ducking it. He wants to step out and be bold and play loud and proud and say, look at me for the next 30 seconds while I do this. And, that's a mentality that a guy like Keith Richards doesn't have.
No.
And
he just kind of hangs there and does his thing, and he's brilliant.
He's brilliant in his own way, and he's different in a different way. And it's really about, to me, it's always about what you value in music, what you value in a player. All of that is, I'm a huge fan of Yes. I love Yes. I love Steve Howe's playing. He's not a Dino. He's not that kind of guy. He's not that kind of player. But I love their music. I love, So it's really just about where the site is concerned. It's about this sliver of this genre where people are playing in this style of guitar. It doesn't mean we can't talk about other folks. It doesn't mean we don't appreciate other things, but because everybody I know on that site likes things that are not of that genre as well as that. But, this is a focus of this website that gave it a niche audience that to this day, nothing else has anything quite like that focus.
Right. Right.
I mean, you can have a metal website, or you could have a guitar website, but to have a website that's focused on a specific style of music that, it starts here and it ends here, and everything on the edges is kind of fuzzy.
Right. Yeah, I'm reading now like Dinosaur Rock guitarists in general don't play corporate suck-ass rock. The guys in Styx, Foreigner, the Eagles, and Boston are not dinos.
No. Steve
Lukather is a dino when he's not in Toto.
Yeah. He's a monster player, but he's not playing like, heavy riff rock music most of the time. He's a ridiculous lead player, one of the very best, but he is not, usually making the kind of music that excites me the most. He's very jazzy in a lot of respects. That band, the guys, I've never been a big fan personally of where the influence on the rock comes from the jazz side, where you're talking about your Steely Dans and your Totos and Boz Scaggs and all of these things that are more jazz influenced rather than blues influenced or classical influenced.
Right.
All right. Because you have your German guitarists, they're all sort of classical influenced. And then you have, a lot of the American guys are more blues influenced, and some of the British guys too are blues influenced. But the ones that are the jazz influenced, that kind of music has never struck a chord with me personally. I know a lot of people love it, but that's and I'm not knocking the quality of the playing. These are good players.
Definitely different kind of audience. It's,
yeah.
I mean, it never did a whole lot for me either, to be honest. I mean, I always just really been a blues guy, and then after that, I became a rock guy. Mm-hmm. One of the first CDs I ever had was 10 years after. Was the live album, and that was kind of my
big.
I'm sorry.
That's the one with the big 10-minute Alvin Lee thing or whatever.
Yeah.
What is it? Going Home.
Yeah, Going Home with the guitar solo. Yeah. Just like you can barely keep up,
It's a landmark moment in guitar. It's certainly one of those landmark moments, but beyond his work on tracks like that, I wasn't much into that band. But I mean, I'm not knocking it either. It's just that it was like you said, we all find things we gravitate to and things that we don't. So
right,
yeah.
Well, that album kind of was my introduction to rock music, and then from there,
sure,
Guns N' Roses, and from there I went back to Deep Purple and Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin, of course. And are you a fan of Deep Purple?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Love, love, love Deep Purple. And I even love them up until when, even that last album that they did with Tommy Bolin. I love that album. It's not very much like the earlier Purple, but it was a great band and a great album at that time. Even though Tommy wasn't Richie, but I mean, it was interesting music in a different vein and all of that. One thing you mentioned earlier that I wanted to come back to before I forget, which I do in my old age, is you said, what if another guy came along that was really great? I've often thought and had discussions with people, who is the last guitar hero?
I would
Who's
say
the last
Slash.
guy? I would too.
Yeah.
I would too. I don't think there's been another guitar hero since then. And even if there are people who like, who like John Mayer, and John Mayer's a good player. But
Yeah.
he's not what you call a guitar hero.
I wouldn't. I mean, chicks love him. He's got that going for him, and he knows how to play for sure. But I don't know.
He's not.
Yeah.
There's no swagger there.
Yeah.
There's no guitar hero swagger there, and that's got to be there. I mean, and by the way, we talked about
dangerous.
going back to Jimmy Page and to a degree Keith Richards, but swagger comes from those guys.
Right.
The whole swagger of the rock guitar player comes from Keith Richards and Jimmy Page, and Jimmy got a lot of it from Keith, and took it further.
Keith Richards is still the coolest motherfucker.
Absolutely. He put out an album in 2015 that was fucking great. It's called Cross-Eyed Heart. It's not really a guitar album per se from the standpoint of heavy rock or anything like that. It's not a lead guitar album. It's just an album of Keith doing songs and stuff and it's so freaking cool, and it's so good, and it's
I got to listen to that.
It's so much variety from track to track. And the other thing you hear when you hear Keith without the Stones is you hear how much of the Stones is Keith. You listen to this album and you hear, oh my God, everything that, this is what Keith, we know what, we sort of think like this sonic idea of what the Stones are, what they sound like. And you listen to this album, you can hear how much of that is Keith. What percentage of that is Keith? And that I found really interesting, because I'm a huge Stones fan going way back to when I was in my early teens. And the other thing is the album from track to track has a bunch of different stylistic genres. Some of it is, very Stonesy. Some of it's sort of country. Some of it's sort of bluesy, and it's just it's one of those albums that if you're I think you're sitting there drinking a wine. If you're having a good conversation with somebody and you're chilling out for the evening, put on Cross-Eyed Heart in the background, and I think you'll enjoy it. It's really it was a terrific little album he put out in 2000.
Listen to that, like he's there with his rough face and his hands all arthrited.
Yep.
And,
yep.
Yeah. Man, it's amazing that guy's still alive, man.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. He's just he's, if COVID gets everybody else, Keith will still be around.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think, part of the thing about being this classic guitar hero in the parlance of my website, the Dinosaur Rock Guitar hero, is swagger.
Yeah.
And balls and do you have that when you walk on stage? Do you play that way when you walk on stage?
Yeah, you either have it or you don't. I don't think you can cultivate it.
Or there's some people like Clapton who had it and he lost it. Although he didn't really have the swagger, but he had the fire in his playing.
Right.
He never had like the stage presence of a Jimmy Page or a Keith Richards or anything like that. But he would stand there in the Cream days. He would stand there and just smoke everyone.
Right.
For a while. And then, as soon as he started getting revered for it, he stopped. He's like, oh, no. I don't want that.
Yeah. But,
don't worship me.
What do you think that was? Like, was he just like
very insecure?
Maybe. Yeah.
Very, very insecure. I read his book. He comes off as a very insecure, weak-minded weak-willed person who is very easily put off, I guess.
Wow.
He was a guy who wanted to, he wanted to be a bluesman, and instead of he was becoming a pop star, and that's why he left the Yardbirds, to avoid becoming a pop star, and then he became a rock star. And then later on, he ditched being a rock star and being a guitar god and went back to being a pop star.
Right.
With his solo career.
But the guitar battle that he has on Layla with Dwayne Allman is that's one of my favorite guitar battles ever, and in my opinion, Dwayne Allman beats him in that guitar battle.
Well, I don't know if I would actually go for it as a battle, but yeah, they're trading licks, and to me, Layla's a really good album, but there's nothing on there that compares with what he did in Cream, especially live. In my opinion, other people may have other opinions. That's fine, but I never saw the fire in his playing like it was between the time he did the Bluesbreaker album and then when Cream ended. That was, for me, the period that is the most interesting period for Clapton. And if you want to listen to a really great guitar back and forth, look up Derek Sherinian's God of War.
Derek Sherinian's God of War?
Derek Sherinian, yep. Derek Sherinian, who was used to be the keyboard player in Dream Theater. He put out a bunch of solo albums with a lot of great guitar players on it. There's a track called God of War where it's Zakk Wylde and John Sykes going back and forth.
Oh my God.
And that's freaking awesome. I mean, and it's so obvious who's who too. If you have any familiarity with these guys,
well, you can recognize.
They're both such
yeah.
They're both instantly recognizable if you're into this kind of music. But that's one of those things where they're trading off and stuff and trying to outdo each other. And it's an instrumental track, but it's sort of fusiony, but it's like
very cool cover too, with like the Greek statues and everything.
Yeah.
I'll definitely give that a listen. Yeah, sadly you can play it, otherwise he'll just take it off, to copyright. And
yeah, no, I mean just for anyone who cares, that's one of those places where you have two heavyweights really going toe to toe in one instrumental track, and it's a lot of fun, and you can tell they're having fun with it.
I bet you.
I don't know. I bet they weren't even in the same room.
Oh, there we go again. This Zoom stuff. I'm happy we have it, but it doesn't work perfectly. So we got another dropout here. Let's see if we can get it back. It sucks, man, because it kind of interrupts the flow. It always takes a couple minutes before you're both back into it again. There we are.
Hey.
Yeah. Man, it keeps doing that. It's
yeah. Well, at least it keeps trying to reconnect us anyway. So
did you have to rejoin, or did it rejoin?
No, it's just it drops, and then the Zoom dialog comes up and it says connecting, and it takes a few seconds, but then it reconnects. So
that's weird because the quality is good when it's good. It's
yeah.
You wouldn't think there's an ocean between us.
No.
Well,
but you were going to ask me something before that happened.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine you were a big fan of Zakk Wylde because he's like a stereotype, like front man, take your head off type of guitar player.
Yeah, I loved his work on not the first Ozzy album, but the second one.
So No More Tears?
No More Tears and Osmosis, I think, are fantastic.
It's a great name for our album.
Yeah, it was. But I mean, his playing on that, he was still a kid. He was like under 25, I think, when he recorded No More Tears. And his maturity level on playing on that album was sensational. I mean, there's not a bum track on that album. That, to me, that song-wise, that album holds up with anything that Randy did, and for the most part, I think it's better than what he did with what Ozzy did with Jake, in terms of songs. And then I think Osmosis was similar. I'm a huge fan of the Pride and Glory album. I liked the first Black Label Society album, but I haven't liked one since.
Right.
And then he had this solo album, I think it was called Book of Shadows or something like that, which didn't really do much for me. But yeah, I think Zach, when he's on, is wonderful and as good as anybody. He's out of his mind, by the way. He's absolutely knucking futz.
Scary individual.
Yeah, and he's sober now, too. But, I mean, this whole Viking Berserker thing he's got going on.
I don't think it's an act,
I read,
you know?
I read, you know, I read his book, and it was laugh out loud funny in spots, and I reviewed it on the website if you want to go and look it up. But, I mean, it was like, you know, really a strange kind of, you know.
Man, this is kind of it's
sorry.
It's starting to get worse, man.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think you're gonna have to do a little editing, but anyway, I reviewed the book. It was you know, entertaining, but also you go, you know, this guy is kind of cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. But I love his playing when he's on, and he is definitely one of those people who wears the flag, who flies the flag proudly for this style of music, because he is the epitome of that guy who wants to go on stage and rip your head off. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Let's see. I also see you read, man, that website is it's a wealth of information, really, also when it comes to gear and guitars and speakers and just basic information. I remember spending a lot of time on there, and back in the days when the internet was just slow, it was all text, but you know, you would load a page and it would take you know, like 20 seconds probably to load a page, but then I could read something for 20 minutes.
Yeah, the original idea was to sort of capture the knowledge that we felt at the time was being threatened of being lost forever, like in terms of like how to get certain tones, how to get certain, you know, certain gear choices that would serve you well in this particular style of music. You know, what kind of things to look for when you're purchasing a guitar, if you're in this, you know, realm, or an amp, even more importantly, an amp. Because, you know, a lot of that knowledge over time, it's become almost moot, because it's almost impossible. You have to work really hard to get bad tone these days, because the quality control of all of the guitars and amps and everything is so much better than it used to be. Used to be you had to be in the know. You had to do a lot of back-end homework to, you know, to figure out what things would give you the sound you wanted. Now there's like a zillion ways to get to the same place, and all of them are fine, and all of them are, you know, reliable. Right. And, you know, back in the, you know, in the day, you know, there were differences in like, you know, one Gibson and another Gibson of the same model, and one Fender and another Fender of the same model, one Marshall and one other Marshall of the same model. And if you ran them too hot, they'd blow up, and, you know, this and that could happen. And, you know, you had to know stuff to actually get the tone. And it's like, it's either like, you know, either you buy a 50 or 100 watt British amp and you get the tone, or you buy a PV, or you buy something that's like lesser than that and you don't get that tone.
Right.
And now it's not like that. Now you can buy almost anything off the rack and get good results, and get good tones. And, you know, if, you know, the quality control, if you buy one guitar versus another guitar sitting right next to it, the quality is going to be better. You know, all of the objective points have been raised and stuff. But it was sort of like to try to capture those kinds of concepts and ideas at the time when the website was starting. It was still, you know, hard to convey to young people when, like, you know, when they're starting out, they're 15, 16 years old, and, you know, the people that were my age were like, you know, between 30 and 35 when the website started. We had a wealth of knowledge they didn't have, and we'd try to talk them out of buying like a Line 6 Spider amp, right, and tell them, yeah, you know, wait and get something things. That, you know, wait and get something good. And, you know, of course, they had to make their own mistakes in most cases, and realize that, you know, a year later they shouldn't have done that. But, you know, what we added to the website at that time was a knowledge base of articles about all aspects of playing, guitars, constructions, amps, cabs, anything that had to do with creating this recording, recording techniques, because people were starting to get into home recording at that time. I was starting to get into the home recording at that time. And to sort of like, how do you get, that kind of guitar sound that we all know and love from this era? How do you go about getting that?
Right.
What do you need to go about getting that? Well, it's a lot easier now. And, back in those days, and I'm talking about those days 20 years ago, not 40 years ago, but 20 years ago, it's like, no, you still need a tube amp. You still need real tubes. You still need, this and that and the other thing. And now it's kind of like I almost never bust out my tube amps unless it's really for some reason that I need to get the actual the real sound.
Right.
If I'm practicing, I don't bother. It's too much of a pain in the ass. I practice with these things on.
Headphones.
Through something like that. So it's like why bother? I practice through things that are, convenient to practice through. I bought a pair of these Boss headphones recently, these Boss wireless headphones that have like this almost surround sound kind of feature in them, and you run all of the amps off of your phone. You can dial up different kinds of amp combinations and stuff on your phone, and you play, and it's silent and it's wireless. And for practice, for me, that was wonderful.
It actually works if I'm playing, really well.
Yeah, right, exactly. But if I have to play a real gig, or if I'm doing a real recording session, I'm going to bust out a real tube amp and I'm going to throw a mic on a cabinet. Now but when I'm doing a demo, if I'm just doing a demo to get an idea down, I don't do that. I go to my software and I plug in to my audio interface and I dial up an amp simulator, something that sounds crunchy and good, and it's fine for that context. So it's like, it used to be you only had one way to get that sound, and that's overdriving a real tube amp. And in those days, they were only 50s and 100s. Now you can overdrive a 7-watt amp and go through a 112 speaker and get that sound at like a quarter of the volume.
You don't have to blow your roof off.
Yeah, right. And, for those of us who live in cities and in apartments, hooking up a 100-watt amp and a 412 cab these days is not, really going to make you happy with your neighbors.
No.
So,
I have a Black Star tube amp that's 45 watts, but it has a button on it that lets me like tune down the wattage on the power stage.
Yeah, that was that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
So when I turn it down all the way, it's like 4.5 watts, and I can get like that hot power stage sound without having to,
That's what it's all about.
Bring the building down.
Yep, yeah. That's what it's all about. Yeah. And that started around, the first time we really saw that was when a bunch of us from the site went out to Nam in 2008 and saw the first Orange Tiny Terror.
Oh yeah, that thing. I remember that.
That thing is I still have mine. It's a beast. It can be 7 watts or it can be 15 watts. You cannot get a bad sound out of it.
Yeah.
It doesn't. You can plug in the worst guitar in the world. You can't get a bad sound out of that amp. It's just wonderful in that respect. It's a really, really simple design. If you look inside the thing, it's got like one EL30, one EL84, and like a preamp tube, and not a whole hell of a lot else.
But how come no one else came up with that earlier? Then I wonder.
I think it's a really good question why they didn't get there earlier. Because even in the 70s, everybody I knew was saying, I want to get this sound, but I don't want it this loud.
Right.
And I don't know what the amp companies were thinking. I think it took, I don't know why it took so long. You'd think, who really needs to play a club with 50 or 100 watt amps and 412s or 812s.
Yeah.
I mean, back in the day, it was a status thing to have big Marshall stacks on the stage behind you. And it was, it was really a wonderful thing to experience and behold if you ever had the chance to do it. But you only were able to turn that amp up, like a tiny little bit.
Yeah.
And people were putting attenuators on them, and the sort of the precursors to hot plates, so that you could basically get the sound, but not at the volume, because if you're in a small club, you're just destroying people at that level. And
yeah, for those who don't know, like a 412 is a like a cabinet with 4 12-inch speakers in it, and
right.
you would stack both of those, 2 of those on top of each other, and you put the amplifier on top of that, and it would be taller than a big person. And and those things, like maybe 50 or 100 watts doesn't sound as much, because if you go into an electronics store, you see speakers sold, Bluetooth speakers that say that they're 200 watts, but works different with tube amplifiers.
Not the same.
Yeah,
it's not the same.
50 to 100 watts will it's so loud that it makes your teeth hurt.
Right, and 100. And the other thing is, it's not a geometrically or mathematically even curve. A 50 watt amplifier is not half as loud as a 100 watt amplifier. It's probably 10% less loud.
Yeah,
100 watt amplifier is just a little louder than a 50. So, the amplifier companies finally realized that the guitarist wanted something that could get that sound, but didn't have to be quite that loud. And, Vox put out the first of what we call the lunchbox size amps, but the one that really was the first one that a lot of people gravitated to, especially the people who want to play crunchy, heavy rock, was the Orange Tiny Terror. And it's really simple. It's got a volume knob, a gain knob, and I think it's got a bass treble. Turn it one way, it's bass. Turn it the other way, it's treble. It couldn't be any simpler. And we saw it for the first time in 2008. So you're thinking, okay, we've had this problem since the mid-'70s. They didn't solve it in the 80s. They didn't solve it in the 90s. They didn't solve it in the first few years of the 2000s. It took till 2008 to come up with this idea of, let's scale this stuff down.
It's the same year the iPhone came out, the first one.
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy that it took that long. But I mean, I think a lot of these companies are really slow on the uptake for what they should be producing, and what they're sort of tone deaf in terms of what the players are looking for. Marshall, after that, instead of putting out a comparable item, I think they've done so since then, but one of the things Marshall did was they put out a 1 watt series of small heads of like the classic Plexi style Marshall,
yes.
the JCM 800 style Marshall.
I saw those.
They put them out as 1 watt versions of these things, okay, and they were insanely popular. People loved them. They sounded great. You can record, get that sound, but if you mic it up, you get that sound, and you can't tell it's a small amp. And they were insanely popular for people who were doing home recording and just playing around the house. And what did they do? After a year of being in production, they stopped. It's like, why are you stopping? It's crazy. You're selling these like crazy, and you stop it.
And they were cool looking too. They were just like mini versions.
Right. And now they're doing a 20 watt version.
Well, 20 watts is loud too, though, already.
It can be, but I think you can also, you can turn it down. I think you can scale it back to something else like that. And if I already have a bunch of amps that do this from other brands, but if I didn't, I'd be looking at those Marshalls, because they're now giving you, the 20 watt, and I think you can turn it down to 10 or something like that, or 7. I don't know, but I mean, they sound really good, and they sound like they're supposed to sound. And I think they're called the Studio Series now, or something, Studio 20 Series, and they have a Plexi version and an 800 version and a 2000 version, a DSL kind of thing. And then they have the, what do they call it? The ones they used to be in the silver.
Silver Jubilee, I think.
Yeah, the Silver Jubilee.
What are some of your favorite albums when it comes to just great examples of real dinosaur rock guitarists? Aside from the ones we already mentioned, we mentioned first Guns N' Roses album. We mentioned Deep Purple, probably Machine Head, right? First Jimi Hendrix album.
And certainly in rock is also on that list for Deep Purple.
In rock,
and then if you're going to continue the Blackmore thread, Obviously, the 3 albums he did with Ronnie James Dio, Richie Blackmore's Rainbow, and to a better extent, Rainbow Rising is a classic, and Long Live Rock and Roll are all absolutely wonderful. The last 2 especially. So you've got that. Sabbath, Heaven and Hell with Dio, possibly the greatest metal album. It's certainly in the conversation of the greatest metal albums of all time.
Heaven and Hell.
Heaven and Hell, obviously. Anything from Sabbath and Rainbow that where Dio was concerned. If we go back a little bit into the 70s, the Zeppelin albums, particularly Zeppelin 4, Zeppelin 2, you can't go wrong with any of those albums, any of the Zeppelin albums. The first 5 Black Sabbath albums with Ozzy, the first 5, which is Black Sabbath, Paranoid, Master of Reality, Sabotage, and Sabbath Bloody Sabbath.
It was Randy Rhoads.
Those are all Randy Rhoads, the 2 albums with Ozzy. Absolutely must-haves. Let's see.
Also, No More Tears and
No More Tears, yeah. That's the other era, right. And, of course, Bark at the Moon for the Jake era. I'm a huge fan of John Sykes. I'm a huge fan of Blue Murder, his band Blue Murder. The first 2 Blue Murder albums are absolutely astonishing. Way better, in my opinion, and I'm probably in the minority on this, but way better than the Whitesnake '87 album by a long shot. I think I love the Black Sabbath Born Again album with Ian Gillan on vocals. Some of the most astonishing vocals you will ever hear on any album. It's like every track, it's Ian Gillan like shrieking his brains out in this insane way, and it's really cool. People don't like the production on the album, but I don't think it detracts too much. It's one of those albums that is just such an overlooked gem. Thin Lizzy, pretty much everything from Fighting through Thunder and Lightning, where you have the classic era with Brian Robertson and Scott Gorham. You have Jailbreak, Johnny the Fox, and Soldier of Fortune. Not Soldier, Bad Reputation. It's got Soldier of Fortune on it. Bad Reputation is the name of the album. I mentioned the Sabbath albums with Ozzy. I mentioned the Ozzy albums. Scorpions, pretty much anything from like Fly to the Rainbow or In Trance all the way up through Love at First Sting. All excellent, whether it's Uli or Matthias Jabs. Except anything from Breaker all the way up through their modern stuff. There's a few clunkers in there, but certainly the classic period from Breaker through Russian Roulette and Objection Overruled, and then the newer albums they started out with Blood of the Nations and Stalingrad are both fantastic. Rise of Chaos, I didn't like the one that was in between that one so much. Gary Moore. My goodness, for the most intense guitar playing you'll ever hear in your life. Corridors of Power, Victims of the Future, We Want More. You can start with those 3. Let's see. I think I talked about Schenker. The UFO era of Schenker from like Force It through Strangers in the Night. And then with Michael Schenker Group, the first album, the second album, and the live album. Live at Budokan, and then Assault Attack with Graham Bonnet on vocals was great. Who else? No one talks enough about Loudness. Loudness were fantastic. At least get Thunder in the East. That's a bulletproof album from 1985. It stands up to this day. The first 2 Dio albums, Holy Diver, Last in Line. So many others. Iron Maiden, everything from their first album up through Somewhere in Time. It hasn't been so great after that. Bruce Dickinson's solo albums, Balls to Picasso, Accident of Birth, Chemical Wedding, Rush, everything from their first album up through at least, I'd say, if you want to talk Dino, through like Signals, and then after that they were still good for a few years. Grace Under Pressure, Power Windows, Hold Your Fire, less lead guitar work on those, but still great songs. Counterparts, in my opinion, was the last great Rush album. The first 3 Queen albums are as heavy as anything you'll ever hear. Brian May's just a madman on the first 3 Queen albums. Queen, Queen 2, and Sheer Heart Attack. And then you get into the era that everybody thinks of when they think of Queen. But they were such a heavy band in those first 3 albums. Thin Lizzy is what I was talking about, I think, before. The classic period with Brian Robertson, Scott Gorham. And then you have the album Black Rose with Gary Moore. And then you have Thunder and Lightning with John Sykes. All wonderful albums. Aerosmith, we talked a little bit about Aerosmith, the first album, Get Your Wings, Toys in the Attic, Rocks, gets a little spotty from there, and then you get into the 90s where they got back together and they were clean and sober. There's some good albums in that era too. Get a Grip is terrific, Pump is terrific.
I listen to Get a Grip quite a lot.
It's really good. It really is really good. It doesn't have quite the sleaze factor of the earlier Aerosmith, but it's still great music.
Yeah.
I think I mentioned those guys.
Hendrix,
there's only 3 or 4 albums he put out in his lifetime, and the rest of it's stuff they put out after he was gone. So, yes, all of the 3 albums by Hendrix that are the biggies are You Experienced, Axis Bold as Love, and
Band of Gypsies.
No, Electric Ladyland.
Oh yeah.
Band of Gypsies is not The Experience. That's the other band. That's good too. I don't like it as much. I don't think it's quite as song oriented, but it's good. And then there's some the different repackaging of the outtakes. The Cream albums, Fresh Cream, Disraeli Gears, Wheels of Fire. You could say Goodbye is an interesting listen. Queen Live Volume 2 is really fun. That's pretty heavy. That's really hearing them, what they sounded like live and massive. The Who, my God. Where do you start with The Who? All of that stuff is great. We talked about Zeppelin. We talked about
Deep Purple.
Deep Purple, yeah. So when Deep Purple first started, their first 3 albums were sort of like psychedelic rock, and then they did the concerto with orchestra thing. That stuff is not the Deep Purple that anyone's thinking of when they hear it. Not that there isn't some good tracks on there, but that's sort of a trippy psychedelic thing with a lot of covers and stuff. They become Deep Purple on In Rock. So you have In Rock, and you have Fireball, and you have Machine Head, and you have Made in Japan, and then you have
the drums on that song Burn is
Burn.
That's something else.
Yeah, so I mean, you could skip Who Do We Think We Are. You can skip that. Then you go to Burn, which is fantastic, and then Stormbringer, which I still love a lot, but Richie is like half checked out on that album, and they're going more in the direction of David Coverdale and Glenn Hughes. And then you have Come Taste the Band with Tommy Bolin, which, if you think of it as anything other than Deep Purple, you'll really enjoy it. But if you're trying to compare it to classic Deep Purple with Blackmore, you're not going to. It's not a fair comparison. But it's a real good album on its own right. I went over the Rainbow stuff already. Those are the heavy hitters. I went over the Scorpions. I went over Iron Maiden. And that's just off the top of my head.
Ozzy.
Ozzy, we talked about that. The first 2 albums with Randy. Bark at the Moon. I'm not a huge fan of The Ultimate Sin. I'm not a huge fan of No Rest for the Wicked. But I think, the 2 later ones we already talked about, No More Tears and Osmosis, are terrific. Nothing really after that for me.
What do you think of the latest one they put out, 13?
I didn't get into it. I really didn't think it was that great. If you want to talk about some live stuff also, but like the live album they did in '98 on the reunion tour is fantastic. I haven't mentioned any Judas Priest. I'm partial to British Steel, Screaming for Vengeance, and
did you hear the cover they did of Man on the Silver Mountain?
Priest did?
Judas Priest covered Man on the Silver Mountain. They put out.
Cool.
Yeah, they put out like a tribute album after Dio died.
After Ronnie died. Yeah, I haven't heard that. But yeah, I'm sure that's good. Another band that's criminally underrated is Y&T. If you like the rest of this stuff, you should really love Y&T as well. The albums you'll be looking at there are Earthshaker, Black Tiger, Mean Streak, and In Rock We Trust. You start there, and if you're liking it, you can go further. Who else? Queensryche. Damn, they were good back in the day when they had their original guitarists. Queensryche. You have the album The Warning. You have Rage for Order, and then you have Operation Mindcrime, which is one of the greatest metal albums of all time.
Operation Mindcrime.
Yeah. It's a concept album. It's absolutely fantastic. And then you had Empire, which had a bunch of hits on it. And then from there, they started to sort of peter out, and then the band kind of splintered into different groups. But when Queensryche was on its game back in the day, they were absolutely tremendous. And the singer had one of the best vocal instruments you'll ever hear on any person, living or dead. He can't sing that way anymore, but he was magnificent. Who else am I leaving out? I guess those are the big names, really, in the genre. Let me see what else I can look at and jog my memory.
I'm looking at the Dinosaur Rock Guitar page.
Yeah.
Let's see.
I talked about Blue Murder.
Jeff Beck, Richie Blackmore, Clapton.
Dokken, if you want to hear some good George Lynch,
ZZ Top.
Tooth and Nail, Under Lock and Key are really good. ZZ Top. I'm
a big fan of them.
I like Rhythmine. That's one of the ones I like more so than the ones that they got famous on in the '80s. It's much more earthy. It's less electronic drums and more just them playing.
I like the early stuff. Listen to a lot of that. It all kind of sounds the same, but it's all great.
Yeah. Robin Trower is another guy who's really cool and has his own style, his own thing. Let's see. There's a lot of one-off things. The Whitesnake albums that Doug Aldrich did with Whitesnake, Good to Be Bad and Forevermore, are both really good. He did a great job with them. That's enough to keep anybody busy for a while.
That's a lot of albums you just named.
Yeah, and these are all classic, great examples of this style of music, cool. This style of guitar playing. The people who like Yngwie, the Yngwie albums, his first album with Alcatraz, No Parole for Rock and Roll, and then his Rising Force albums. If you like that style, I tend to find it a little overblown and a little overplayed, but it's certainly part of the journey if people are into it.
Cool. All right. Well, we talked about a lot. We talked for
we did.
We talked for over 2 hours. I enjoyed it. Flew by.
Yeah, it really did. It was fun. I appreciate it.
There's there are more stuff I want to talk about. There's like stuff about live bands and live concerts, and I'm also curious what you think about the loudness war, that happened. And,
God, yeah.
All that kind of stuff.
Well,
so I think we should try to do it again sometime.
I'd be happy to talk to you again. Absolutely. In a future time, sure.
So is there any final parting words to my audience besides a whole lot of probably the biggest list of album recommendations anyone's ever heard.
You're gonna have to. I think you're gonna have to type that up and then leave it like as like a still at the end or something like that.
Yeah.
Or put it in the put it in the text underneath or something. Because
I'll put everything in the notes.
For those who don't know, our internet connection dropped about 4 times, so I'm trying to get him out before it drops again. So that's why I'm blazing through them, and rather than just saying, yeah, we could talk about this album for 7 minutes and that one for 10 minutes, and but I think it was just, given our internet connectivity today, it was better to just sort of get them out. And people can, if they go to dinosaurrockguitar.com and they're looking at these alchemy profiles that you brought up, if you scroll to the bottom, there's always a recommended listening section. And those are the more or less the albums that I have sort of said, it's not a complete discography, but these are the ones that I would recommend that people start with. Right. So, if you didn't catch all of this as I was blurring it past you, you can always go and say, I'm a big Randy Rhoads fan. What were the albums? So you can click on that and go, or, I want to know what Scorpions albums to listen to. And you can, click on the guy who was in the Scorpions, and you can see what the albums are that you should start out with. So there's, those kinds of recommendations. And I have them rated too. So it's like, most of that stuff, like I said, I was being very general in passing, but, they're all really either good to excellent, right, the ones that I mentioned. Some of them are absolute total classics, and some of them are just, really good as well. But,
there's one thing that just came up that I forgot, but I remember getting that when I asked you. Have you ever considered turning the website into a book, like a coffee table book or something?
I did try to sort of see if there was any audience for me to, sort of package the alchemy profiles as a book.
Yeah.
And I tried to find likely publishers, but I couldn't find anybody that was really. It's hard to just sort of solicit that stuff cold and like send it in and try to get people interested. You got to find the right kind of publisher. So I had thought about. I pursued it a tiny bit, but nothing ever came of it. And I would certainly reconsider doing that if there was ever some clear path for me to say, okay, I need to get this to these guys, they'll publish it.
Right.
But I don't know who those guys would be. And if anyone wants to contact me and let me know who that might be, I'd be happy to look at that again. Because, I did. The thing about the site, other than the forum part, but the regular part of the site, is the content we've created is content of lasting value.
Right.
It's not like, Instagram stories where it's gone in a few minutes. It's there. It's been there. Some of these articles have been sitting there for 20 years.
Yeah.
And they're still relevant. So I think, if it ever came to pass where someone said, Dave, where I'm calling from a publishing house, we'd like to publish these as a book, I'd look at updating them, going back through and saying, okay, I wrote this in 2008. What's happened to this person between then and then?
Right.
And what kind of update do I need to make?
I bet if you would put something like that up on Kickstarter, I think there's an audience for this. Especially since it's all very well written. It's a cool knowledge base.
Yeah, I mean, there is that aspect of it. I think so too. On the other hand, it's kind of like music in the digital era. People are unwilling to pay for what they can get for free. So, I mean, it'd be like, do I take them off the website and publish it as a book so that, people can't read it for free anymore?
Or just have it both,
Yeah, but, like I said, in this day and age, you can't even get people to pay for well-made music.
Yeah, that's true, I guess.
If they can stream it over Spotify or YouTube. So I'm not, like I said, I'm not against doing it, but I don't see a path or a publisher that is immediately obvious to me I should submit it to.
Okay. Well, it was just an idea.
No, you're right. I had the idea. It would have been a nice. I looked at Hal Leonard. Hal Leonard, publishes a lot of music books and guitar books and things like that. And I said maybe I can send it to Hal Leonard, and I sent them a couple of examples, a couple of the full articles, just so they could get a feel for what it was. Never heard back anything. Oh. So you have to have some sort of an in, I guess. Anyway.
Yeah.
But sure, I'd be happy to talk to you again on other topics if you like. Just let me know, and
yeah, man.
Do it again.
Well, let's do it again sometime. Well,
okay.
Thanks for coming on, man. I'm a big fan, and I'm gonna sign up to the forum. And when this episode's done, I'll edit it down, and I'll be sure to get it to you. And
Yeah, please do. Please send me a link and stuff. And if you're gonna try and register for the forum, do that through email to me. Tell me what username and password you want to use, and I'll set it up for you. We've made it pretty hard to join the forum these days.
Okay.
Because in the early days, we had a lot of people who were just there to start trouble. So we've made it sort of a high hurdle to get in.
Right.
Yeah, because we want to keep it the way we like it.
Nice.
Yeah.
I like that. Keep it small, keep it pure.
Yeah.
All right, man. Well, thanks again for coming on, and let's keep in touch, man.
Sure. Thanks again for having me. Where are you you said you're in the Netherlands?
Yes, sir. I'm in
Where in the Netherlands?
I'm in Rotterdam.
Ah, okay. I used to live in Scheveningen when I was a kid.
Really?
Yeah, my father was on a sabbatical, and we lived there. He was teaching at the University of Delft, and we were living in Scheveningen.
Wow, that's where my you can actually say it properly.
Because I lived there.
Yeah. Delft, the university. What did your dad teach? My dad actually went to college there.
I think he was teaching some pretty heavy shit, something like control systems and things like that. For this was when I was, like I said, I was a kid. It was in the mid-70s.
Wow.
Before that town was actually built up, Scheveningen looked like it was in the 1940s in that time period. It really, the casino hadn't reopened. It hadn't made it into a big beach resort town at that time. And
yeah.
It just looked very old world, like the scene in The Godfather where Marlon Brando gets shot. Right. And he's saying, in the fruit stand. It looked like that in like 1975. So
yeah. Well, Europe took a long time to recover after the Second World War.
Oh, sure. But my wife and I, we love going back to Amsterdam and Holland and visiting all over Europe. But I mean, we have a certain fondness for Amsterdam, obviously. But
well, if you're ever close to us, man, you
absolutely
send me an email. I'll show you Rotterdam.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
It's a cool
absolutely.
city.
I mean, it's one of those things where it's. I have so many forum members in Europe that when I go and I'm anywhere near anybody, I always get in touch with them and we try to hook up and stuff. So
that's really cool.
It's one of the best things about a community like that is when you travel, you end up being in places where you already know people and you can get together and they'll show you around. And when they come to New York, I do the same thing for them. And it's really that's been one of the most positive aspects of having the website is like these relationships you build with people over time. And then, it's great when you go to a foreign city and someone's there to, show you around.
Right.
Take you to the places that are not the touristy places and stuff.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure I'll be in New York sometimes in the future. Well, I mean, it'll take a while before I'll get on a plane, obviously. But...
I think, yeah. I mean, under COVID, we're all constrained by that and like 14-day quarantines and all of this stuff. But yeah, if you're ever passing through New York, give me a shout.
Cool. Well, again, man, thanks. I really, really enjoyed it. And when it's all done, I'll be sure to get it to you. And are you gonna post it on the website or on the forum or?
Yeah, I'll probably do that. Yeah.
Cool.
I'll post a link to it. I'll post it in the DRG Facebook page and stuff. And, yeah.
Nice, man. Cool. Well, again, Dave, thank you, and hope you have a great weekend, man.
You too. Take care.
Take care.
It was a pleasure.
Likewise. Pleasure was all mine.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right, everybody. That was a good episode, wasn't it? I'm a big music guy, and I learned a lot today. Learned a lot about new albums. I got a good new list of things to listen to now, and I'm sure you do too. Man, that guy knows a lot of stuff about his music. Anyway, be sure to visit Alert, or download Alert rather, for the iPhone, ALLERT, for food allergies. If you travel with food allergies, this is the app you want to have in your back pocket to help you navigate your food allergy problems abroad. Also, go to Amazon through the link on our website, thepolarizer.com. That's thepolarizer.com. And we'll get a little kickback every time you order something there. And while you're at thepolarizer.com, be sure to sign up for the newsletter so you never miss an episode. And go to onna.com, use the promo code Polarizer to get up to 10% off your order. And what else? What else have we got? We have more sponsors than that, I believe. Or are we already through? No, man, I think that's it. That's it for today, man. It's episode number 30. That's pretty cool, man. It's been a ride. It's been quite a ride, especially in these weird times. Thanks to the internet, still get to talk to some very interesting, cool people, and I really appreciate it. And I really appreciate you all listening to this. It makes it all worthwhile, and all the emails I get and positive comments. It helps me personally getting through this stuff. And from some of the emails I get from you guys, I get the feeling this podcast also helps you guys through this stuff a little bit. So that's all good. Anyway, thank you all for listening. I appreciate you all, and see you next time. Tot ziens.